this is kind of like a fun class for me because we've been building. I mean, there's been a reason why I put all these classes together in the order they are. So we've covered the fact that how mutual funds work, which is the primary way you set up your portfolio. Then we talked about the power of using just index funds. And then we talked about bonds, and we talked about asset allocation. We talked about all these different things that are really fundamentals of investing. And then I would do these classes, and people would come up, well, I love everything you're talking about here, but like, how do you do it? How do you like actually put this into our lives? And if we want to run our own investments, how do we set this up so that we can do this? So kind of this lesson is kind of talking about that. Building a portfolio, retirement planning. A lot of us are in retirement or going to be in retirement. Answering questions like how much money you need to retire, and if I do retire, then how much can I spend a year? Questions about Social Security, when should I take it? Questions like one that I get a lot is, I have a traditional IRA or my company retirement plan. Should I convert that to a Roth? Is that a good idea? I'll address that tonight too. So anyway, to start it off, I'll just kind of explain. To me, my financial life is equivalent to like juggling. If you get me 2 balls, I probably can be pretty good at juggling. Give me 6, and I'm going to be a disaster. And I think it's imperative to, if you want to be effective at managing your own stuff, it's really important to simplify it, to get it condensed down, your whole financial life. In fact, most of my financial life is just on autopilot, so I don't have to do anything. And that includes paying bills and all that kind of stuff. So I'll just share to you how we've set up ours and our Marie and I. So kind of goes like this. I think it's a really good idea to pick a really solid financial institution to put your investments in. You don't need to have Fidelity and this one and that one and that one and stuff like that. To me, the top 3, and once again, this is just my opinion, but it's based on service, expenses, personal experiences. Top of the list is Vanguard, and Fidelity is right there. And I explained the reason why I prefer Vanguard over Fidelity is simply that if you look at the bond funds, which is roughly 50% of my portfolio, I'm saving like 30 basis points, 40 basis points oftentimes difference. It's almost a 0.5% difference in expenses on the bonds, which is really very, very a big deal. So I can get the expenses much lower at Vanguard. So that's why I've always favored, one of the reasons why I've favored Vanguard. And then the third one, of course, is Schwab. I mean, I think all 3 of these are great financial institutions. And people say, well, like, you know, is it safe to have your stuff at one place? When you're talking about the amount of assets involved in these things, having it at one place is not like, you know, the Depression when people had all in one bank and then the bank failed and they lost everything. I feel pretty comfortable having it in one of these big financial institutions. And as I said, if you're in mutual funds, you're protected by the Investment Act of 1949, so that financial institution can't mess around with it. Furthermore, you have an extra layer of peace of mind with Vanguard in that when you invest at Vanguard, you actually own your investments. You own the mutual funds that you're investing in. So the shareholders of the mutual funds are the investors of the mutual fund. And Vanguard is an outside institution in which manages it for you, and by their charter, the only fees they charge you are fees to manage the products for you, and they're a not-for-profit organization. So it's so interesting because you think of all the different financial institutions and the billions of dollars that are invested, and Vanguard is the only one in this country that operates in such a way. They're tremendously successful, yet they haven't been copied by anybody else. Why? Because they're a not-for-profit thing. I think that's really interesting. So we'll look at Vanguard. And if you look at my investments, I use Vanguard. Once again, you could use whatever one you want. But we'll start with locally. So I have a bank that I use in town. And the bank is a place where I have a safety deposit box. So please, if you don't have a safety deposit box, pinch your pennies and put together, what does it cost, like $30 a year or something like that? I mean, you've got to have those important documents. And, you know, it's like you put them away and 20 years later, you're like, where did I put those? You know what I mean? And so a safety deposit box, that's one of the things that use for me. The other thing a bank is useful for me is I have a checking account at it. So it's through that checking account that I pay my bills. So as I said, I like my financial life really simple. And it's really simple to just have most of the bills that I have automatically withdrawn from my bank account. So that, I would encourage you to do that. So the checks, when I need cash, I'll just write a check and then take it from the bank. So I fund the bank from my investment accounts. So I have investments at Vanguard. So at Vanguard, my portfolio kind of looks like this. Right now, I mean, back in 2000, I simplified it. I had a brokerage account, and I had stocks in there, and then I had mutual funds, and I had all kinds of stuff. But as I simplified it, and as I said, I have a balanced portfolio. So basically, it kind of goes like this, where I use the total stock market index fund for equities. And I've been doing that for almost a quarter of a century now, and been using the total stock market, and more than that, but my portfolio concentrating all my assets on equities, and it's been 25 years, and I have never once questioned whether it was a good idea. And so I did that lesson on it, and you can see why. So I'm very comfortable just using that. It's simple. It's very effective, and it's simple. It's all the diversification you need. Okay, so then on the bond side, then I have bonds over here. And once again, most of this is an IRA, and Vanguard wants you to have it in a brokerage account. So I have it in a brokerage account. And then a thin sliver on the fixed income side is a non-IRA, and that is what's called a money market. And the one I'm using is the prime money, not the prime, the federal. It's the federal. It's called the federal money market account. And what it is, it's money invested in federal or government notes. So it's the ultimate of securities, because some money market accounts, they put it into corporate stuff and riskier stuff. This is backed by government notes. So in the event we ever get into really a bad situation economically and stuff like that, these are backed by the government, the notes in there, so I feel pretty good safe. Because I want the money that I have in a money market account to be really, really high quality and without much risk. So basically, I have like 2 places where I park money. For all my immediate bills and immediate cash things, I like to keep about maybe anywhere from $1,000 to about $10,000 here, depending on whatever. And I fund my money market account annually, and I usually do it the first week of January, because I'm at the age where I have to take an RMD. Before that, I hear people complaining about taking RMDs. And it's really funny to me because we're going to get into like how much can you take from your portfolio to live. Well, I quit working at a very, very young age. And so at 59, even before 59 and a half, I had to take I mean, I've been living on my portfolio basically since I was 42. So I developed the habit of simply, in the beginning of the year, I have a pretty good idea about how much money I'll need for a year. And so what I do is I look at my portfolio, and I have a target asset allocation. And so if the asset allocation is like 58% stocks, 42% bonds, for that year, I will take the money I need to live on. And I have a pretty good idea of how much that is. And I withdraw it in the beginning of the year, like the first week of the year. And I have Vanguard put it in a money market account. This money market account, I have instant access to it because with the money market account, you get free check writing. So they even give you the checks. They're not fancy, but they work. Okay? So the only restriction on the money market account is not how many checks you can write from it, but a check has to be for $250 or more, which isn't a big deal. So basically what I do is I will call Vanguard in the beginning of the year, and I will say, please withdraw this from either the total stock market index fund or the bond fund I have. And in that way, I constantly rebalance my portfolio. And it's worked tremendously for a long, long time. Rebalancing by selling the asset that is high at that particular time in my asset allocation. Okay, so then I park that money in here, and what I do is then I will, if I only have, I usually by the time the last weeks of the year, I pretty much have spent this down to $1,000. So then I'll just take the $10,000 out of here, write a check, put it in here. And so then I'm not writing a whole bunch of checks. And if I get like a big bill, insurance, and I package my insurance. So my house insurance, car insurance for 2 cars, and I have an umbrella policy too. And so that came up to several $1,000s. So instead of writing a check out of my local bank, I'll just write it out of here. But basically, it's so easy because I have immediate access to a large amount of money if I need it at any time. And for the smaller stuff, I have the bank. And then I have all my bills pretty much automatically withdrawn from the bank. And I don't have to be writing checks all the time. Oh, gee, did I remember to pay that? But the only one I actually write a check for every month is the credit card. And I do that. I don't have my credit card automatically withdrawn from my bank because if I ever get in a situation where I'm questioning something and I've already paid it, you know what I mean? At least they don't have my money yet and I can argue with them. If it's a question on the thing. So, but power bills and all that kind of stuff, my Netflix, all that, it's just withdrawn automatically from, Netflix is actually from my credit card. But anyway, most of my bills are automatically paid. So, you don't run into a situation where you get your bill for something and then you say, oh, yeah, I'm busy right now. I'll put it in a drawer and I'll get to it tomorrow. Well, tomorrow comes and you're busy too, and you forgot you put it in a drawer. And all of a sudden it's getting near the end of the month, and you happen to open the drawer, and you're going like, oh my God, I didn't pay that bill. So don't get in that situation. Just put it on cruise control. Another reason why I like to take my money out in the beginning of the year is because of taxes. So there is an excellent website. It's actually AARP has it, and I'm not an AARP member, but you can access it on the internet. And all you have to do is type in AARP tax calculator. You know what? I wish the government would get a clue and look at this website because all Americans could do their taxes almost instantly without a lot of hassle with this thing. It's awesome. So I go to that AARP, and then they ask you, are you filing single or are you filing jointly? So I file jointly. And anyway, you plug in. I have a pretty good idea of my earned income from the year is going to be the money I take and my wife takes from her IRA. That's our RMD. We're retired. We don't have any other income. And the other income is Social Security. Now, Social Security is a whole different ball of wax because depending on how much income you have in a given year, Social Security is taxed up to, I think, 80% or something like that. Well, the neat thing about this AARP tax calculator is that you type in, because I have a pretty good idea of what I need, I'm going to be withdrawing based on what I did last year. And so I'll put in maybe a little bit more than that number, and I'll add my wife's, what was hers last year. I'll put in a little bit more than that, and I'll put that in there as the income we have coming in that year. So if you have rental income coming in, you could put it in there. If you have a pension coming in there, it's all that you can put that in there because that's taxes income. They ask you the questions. If you're still working, you can put the salary in there. And then you put in Social Security, and it automatically calculates and gives you a really good accurate estimate of what your federal taxes are for the year, for the next year. And it's a really good estimate. They even calculate in, the standard deduction, because I take the standard deduction, they put that in there. And so I have a pretty good idea of what my taxes will be on the money I'm taking out. So then when I call Vanguard, I just tell them, okay, take this much out of what I'm withdrawing and send it to the federal government. And then I just maybe cut that in half and say, send the other part to the state. And then I have all my taxes paid for the year. I don't have to worry about quarterly payments and stuff like that. And it's peace of mind, and it's so easy because you've taken care of a lot of the important stuff right in the beginning of the year. You're taking care of the money you're going to need for your bills and for living. You've taken care of your taxes. In my case, I've taken care of my RMD right out of the way. And then I'm thinking, well, gee, I took that out, and we have a bad year, and the market goes down. I took the money out when it was high. And so anyway, it's really worked. It's simple. I suppose if you really want to be picky, you could say, well, if you take the money out in the beginning of the year and then the market goes up 20%, you lost that. Not necessarily, because there's something called, I was thinking about this, because there's something called dollar cost averaging. And dollar cost averaging means that you put money in on a regular basis, and it evens out it takes some of the risk out about timing the market. In other words, you put it in at the wrong time. And so studies have said that you actually get a higher return if you dollar cost average money into the market. Well, to me, it's like I'm taking it out, and it's dollar cost averaging in reverse for me, because if you're taking money out every month, and yeah, the market might be up for the year, but there's lots of months in that year where the market could be way down, and you were selling when it was way down. You know what I mean? When you see what I'm saying? Because I've seen many years where we end up with a 15% year, and that 15% all happened like in the last month or 2 months of the year. The rest of the year, the market was going down. It was very volatile. So I just take all that risk out and just do it in the beginning of the year. But it's so simple, and I don't have to worry about bills. They're getting paid. I don't have to worry. I got cash. If something pops up, I can write a check for $10,000. It's not a big deal because it's right there for Vanguard, and it's sitting there. And right now, it's actually collecting like over 4% interest, almost 5%, something like that. So it's actually growing too. So very simple. Any questions about that? All right. So this sounds great. So then the question is, like, how do I do that? All right. So it isn't really that simple as just saying, well, just take everything and then just move it over to Vanguard or move it over to Fidelity. There's considerations you have to have. If you have money in IRAs or 401ks and you're retiring, it's relatively simple, because with IRAs, if you're with someone that you know obviously their expenses are higher, you want to simplify, you can do an IRA transfer. And that is really, really easy, and I've helped many, many people with this at Vanguard. In fact, the last person I helped, it was really interesting because they had probably accumulated 4 or 5 IRAs. And actually, we were going to do it on the internet, and I said, you know, it's easier just if we get the forms from Vanguard, and we can have them mailed to your house. We'll fill them out and mail them back. Because each IRA you have is you have to do a transfer for each one. You can't just like have one transfer and do a whole bunch of IRAs. You have to do each one. So I actually called the Vanguard and I talked to a representative, and it was so easy that it was so interesting because the guy said, well, how many IRAs do you have? I said, like, we have 4 or 5 here. Well, let's just do them now. And I go, what? Yeah, I can do that for you. He actually, we named the institutions she had her IRAs with, and he was able electronically to transfer everyone just over the phone, giving the information, and they electronically transferred and moved it over there. So it's gotten really easy to do that. So with IRAs, there's not a whole lot of considerations here or problems. One thing I would advise you not to do, because if you do the forms and you get the money, they'll mail you a check. Make sure you send the exact amount. Don't take $10 or $15 from it, because that screws everything up. That's a taxable withdrawal. So you want to move the money over and don't mess with it. 401ks are a little bit different. 457s. In this case, you have to do what's called a rollover. Some people get very confused. Well, I have a rollover IRA. What about the other IRA? A rollover IRA just means that you rolled it from, it's called a rollover because you're rolling over from one tax shelter to another tax shelter. That's why they call it a rollover. IRAs are a transfer from one tax shelter to another, but they're the same tax shelter. Get it? So anyway, with a rollover, you simply, it's a simple form, and once again, you send the form or contact Vanguard, and then they roll it over for you. You don't touch the money. That's the best way to do it. So there's not tax considerations with this. It's pretty relatively simple. Gets a little more dicey if you have individual investments. So I know people that have mutual funds that they've been in for 30 years, and they're reticent about moving them over to Vanguard because there will be tax consequences probably if you do that. So a lot of times people overestimate the tax consequences of selling their mutual funds and moving. So let me explain how that usually works. Most people, what they do is they use the average cost method for investments in mutual funds. So when you have a mutual fund in an individual account that's not in a tax shelter, you get every year you'll get a 1099. And with that 1099, you report the different taxable obligations that are on there. It could be, if it's a bond fund, you'll have could be taxable interest. If it's a stock fund, you could have what's called short-term capital gains, which is basically when the mutual fund manager buys and sells within 1 year, and a short-term capital gain is taxed as income. It could have long-term capital gains. Long-term capital gains is investments that the manager held for more than a year and then sold them, and so then you get a long-term capital gain. And then there's dividends, and dividends are the profits that companies made that they pass through to you. So you have 3 of these on there mixed up, and when you do your taxes, you have to report them. So anyway, if you're doing it legally and reporting your taxes, what happens is by reporting those and paying the taxes on those things on an annual basis, that is added to your original what's called cost basis. So I have kind of a chart here, and it kind of is a simple form kind of explaining how this works. So if you had a mutual fund and you had it for, what do I have here, 5 years. And originally you put $10,000 into that mutual fund. And then the first year you had a distribution of $1,500. The second year you had a distribution of $2,000. The third year it was $2,200. The next year it was $1,000. The next year was $1,300. And this is assuming it's the combination of dividends, short-term capital gains, long-term. They're all grouped together, but they're distributions. You pay the taxes on them. Well, what happens is, by paying the taxes on this, that all this dollars, it added up to $8,000, that is added to your cost basis. And so what the mutual fund company does is that most of them now will tell you what your average cost basis is. And they figure that out by taking the number of shares that you have, divided into this, and then it gets the average cost. So let's say in this example, you're selling it, it's $21 a share. And your average cost, when you add all this is $19. Well, you'll have a $2 per share capital gain. And so it'll be a long-term capital gain then. You're selling it after 5 years. So the long-term capital gain, it's interesting. Now, long-term capital gains are not taxed as income. You need to know that. So if you're in like the 20-some% tax bracket and you have a $10,000 long-term capital gain, that $10,000 isn't taxed as your income. It's taxed at whatever the capital gains rate is for your tax bracket. Could be 15% or could be 20%, but it's less. It's oftentimes less, and it doesn't affect your tax bracket. That's something you should know. Another thing you should know about the tax code, at least until they change it, is the long-term capital gains. You have to do your find the current tax code. So tax bracket code. So just go on the internet and type in tax brackets. So if you kind of have an idea what your income is, then you kind of know what your tax bracket is. So let's say you're a couple and the 12% tax bracket goes up to, I don't know what it is. It's something close to $80,000. Okay, so you take $80,000, and your income for that year is like $70,000. Well, you have like a $10,000 window there, in which if you get like $5,000 of long-term capital gains, $5,000 of dividends, they're actually tax-free, provided they don't go to the next tax added to your income, puts you in the next tax bracket. Get that? So this is one of the things it's a little bit complicated, and I hope you're following this, but it's kind of smart to, if you're moving money to one place and you find out what is your tax obligations on the very investments you're selling, and then look at your income, and then you could calculate maybe how much to sell it each year to keep your capital gains so that they're not taxed, and gradually move the money over. In the case, at least I don't know with the other companies, I assume it's the same, but let's say you have a mutual fund, but you want to move yourself over to Vanguard. You can actually take your mutual funds as is, and you can transfer them into a brokerage account at Vanguard, and there's no tax obligations. And then you can gradually sell them as tax smart you want to do. So you can have, if you have an IRA or a 401k and you roll that over to Vanguard and you have personal investments in a brokerage account or with a local guy, you can actually move those into a brokerage account at Vanguard and condense them down without selling them. And I know lots of people that do that. Or you might have a great mutual fund that's been performing really well and you want to keep it, and out of your whole portfolio, you can just move that over to Vanguard and keep your other stuff there. So really, really easy to do this, but make sure you do it tax smart. One of the things I haven't talked about in this class, because I'm talking about taxes right now, is, let's say you sell a cottage, or you run into some money through inheritance or something like that. And I often get asked this question. I had a guy that actually sold a business and came into a huge amount of money, at least $10,000. And he was asking me like, okay, and he was relatively young, and like 40, and he said, I know I have enough money I could stop working, but I love what I'm doing, and the company that bought us out, they want me to work there. So, how could I invest this smartly? And I just said, I've looked at this particular investment choice. There's plenty other ways. You could go to the total stock market index fund. You can go to a bond fund. Either way, if you use the intermediate tax-exempt bond fund, that's very tax efficient. Or, like I say in juggling, keep it simple. And I've checked this particular fund. It's been around for quite a while. I checked the performance of it versus other what's called balance funds. And a balance fund is a mutual fund in which the managers take some of the money, and usually about 60% of the money, and put it in the stock market, and about 40% of the money and put it in the bond market. But this particular balance fund maintains a balance of about 50-50. And Vanguard has it, it's called the Tax Managed Balance Fund. And I've looked at this and the performance of it versus other balance funds that are even more aggressive in the stock market, and it performs so well against those. And the premise of this particular fund is on the stock side, they maximize every strategy possible to make sure that there's not taxable distributions on an annual basis on capital gains and stuff like that on the stock side. So it's super, super tax efficient on the stock side. On the bond side, what they do is they take your money and they invest it in municipal bonds throughout the country. And so with municipal bonds, all the interest is tax exempt. So here you have an investment choice in which, if your target is to have, and this guy, I said to him, okay, you have more, you already have critical mass. You have many more years for this to grow. You have a choice. They have a tax-managed fund that's 100% in equities and has all the volatility of the stock market, but it's very tax efficient. Or if it was me, and usually that's what when anybody asks me any question about investments, I usually refer to if it was me, or if you were my mother, or if you were my brother or sister. Because that's the way I think. It's like I wouldn't ask somebody to do something I wouldn't do myself. And I said to him, okay, this particular fund, it's averaged this amount, and it's done it very tax efficiently. And it's performing so well. I don't think there's any limit on how much you can limit yourself. You could probably put all that in there. And he goes not a bad idea. I can just park it in one thing, and I can have diversification of the stock market. I can have the bond market. It's tax efficient, and it's much like having almost like an IRA, but I can take the money out any time. And then when he does take money out of it, on the stock side, that will be a long-term capital gain, which is very tax efficient too. So keep that in your notes, that if you run into money and like for instance, you have minimum required distribution. I meet people all the time. They have a $50,000 or $60,000 minimum required distribution, and they have pension and they have Social Security coming in. They really don't necessarily need that money. Then where could I, put it so I don't have to, I can invest it, and I don't have to worry about asset allocation and managing it and all that kind of stuff. Tax Managed Balance Fund is a great place to park it. If you want low costs, you want tax efficiency, and you want your asset allocation managed by one investment, it's a tremendous choice to have out there. So just be aware of that. Check it out. See if it's up to your liking, but it's a really nice choice that's out there that you don't have to go and put money in a bond fund or put it in the total stock market index fund and then manage it and all kind of stuff. It's just a one-stop thing, which is pretty cool. Yes?
What kind of return, I'm sure you probably don't know, but what kind of return would you expect?
All I can say is I looked at it a year ago or so, and I was like checking it to other balance funds, and it was within fractions of a percent of the other balance funds with Fidelity and other companies. So I would leave that up to you to do your homework, and you can check it out. But it to other balance funds, it was really, really pretty good. Based on the fact that it's 50 and 50, and you take municipal bonds, probably the long-term average return on municipal bonds is somewhere around 4%, and the long-term returns on the stock market is 10%. That's 14. You're probably going to average around 7, over long periods of time. So if 7 isn't good enough for you, then find something else. But if I was going to a balanced portfolio, remember, the tax efficiency makes that 7% way better than potentially making more, and it's something that you're going to have to pay a lot of taxes on. Does that make sense to you? So taxes can be just as punitive to you as high expenses in total return that you actually keep in your pocket. So looking for tax-efficient investments on the side of outside tax shelters, really, really a good idea. And I mean, this particular fund really is appealing to me. I will say I have zero money in it, only because I have zero money to invest. Because I have a goal every year of my minimum required distribution. Even though it's more than I need, I have a goal of getting rid of it every year. Yes. So I spend it and give it away. Because I can. It's even less than I really need to live on. You see what I'm saying? I mean, it's more than I really need to live on. So what's the point of trying to maximize my accumulation at my age? Share it. There's lots of really good places, and that's one of the great things about being successful with finances, is don't die with your money. Pass it on to people, and don't wait till you're dead. This is beyond, to me, against my value system. I want to see what they're doing with my money, because if they ain't doing what I want with my money, they ain't going to get any more money. So I like to find, and in Oshkosh we have so many good places to donate money to and help, and I have so many different individual cases. I have really some heartfelt stories about people that I've been able to help that had tragedies. I almost tear up when I start thinking about some of them, but it's really, you run into really tragic circumstances in your life. And so being able to help people, that's what this is all about. It's not about, just dying with a whole bunch of money. So that's just my 2 cents worth, and take it or leave it. Because I'm only bringing this up because I meet people all the time, and they're obsessed with passing on money. I mean, they're living way below their means. They're not enjoying their life. They're like pinching every penny. They're complaining about taxes. They're complaining about the cost of things at the grocery store. And they have $2 million sitting in the bank. You know what I mean? That's attitude. How can you be happy if all you're looking at is negatives? Because you're obsessed about money. Money is just something that you've accumulated. It's a blessing we all have. Share it and make it, and what makes you happy. It's not going to make you happy to just pile it up in the bank. You know what I mean? So, anyway, this isn't church, by the way. Okay, so any more questions about that, about setting up your own portfolio? Now, can you see when I say the way I approach finances, there's no reason why just about anybody can do it if you keep it simple. If you want to make it really complicated and wheel and deal and watch the stock market every day and try to time and get in and out and all that kind of stuff, I mean, some people really enjoy that. But the more complicated it gets, the more the chance of error comes in and the more work you have to put into it. I just keep it simple, and it's been very, very effective for me. And I just share that, take it or leave it, okay? Okay, so I used to do this whole series of different objectives and checklists, because oftentimes people look at their financial life and they have no goals. They just randomly bounce from one thing to another. So here's kind of a checklist of investment, of things that you want to check off that in your financial life you look at as objectives. So the first thing is, if you're working, you're younger, setting a goal of at least 10% in savings and earnings. And once again, this only applies to people in their 20s and early 30s. And if you haven't done any investing and you're starting in your 40s and 50s, that 10% is not going to cut it. Then you got to double it, maybe even sometimes triple it. And that's why starting young is a really good idea. And make sure you have a nest egg of at least 6 months that you can fall back on. And so many people live right to the edge, consuming that the money is going to come in there. Have money in the bank. I've oftentimes people, I've got $30,000 or I have $40,000 in the bank. It's not making 1%, it's only making a 1% interest, or it's making no interest. Am I being dumb? And I'm going like, you're retired, if it gives you peace of mind, having that, it's not a bad idea. Don't call it's not necessarily dumb. How much are you going to actually make on $30,000? Having that in the bank is a good idea, just for the peace of mind, and that you won't have to borrow if you need $10,000 or $20,000. So have that nest egg. And it doesn't necessarily, the return on that is not so important. What's important is that when you want it, it's going to be there. And that's why, I use the money market account I do, and I use the bank that I have. Okay, if you have student loans, make double payments on those. Get rid of those darn student loans. Question is, do I make investments first, or do I pay off the student loans? And that goes to, what is your student loan rate? If you tell me it's about 5%, then where can you go and you can guarantee yourself 5% with no risk? Because everything you pay in debt is a guaranteed return of interest you're not going to have to pay. So I am a huge proponent of getting rid of debt. I've always kind of made sure that I don't have debt. Necessarily it's not always the financially smartest thing to do, but I like the fact that not having debt allows you so much more financial flexibility in your life. I strongly consider home ownership in your financial plan in life, because once again, what do they say? When you rent, you get nothing back in return, no equity. So a home is like a lousy investment because the return on it is not that great. Home prices around here have gone up a lot lately, so you say, what is he talking about? But I've lived in my same house since 1992, and the increase in the value of it, I would say 70% of it has happened in the last 5 or 6 years. Those other 25 years, there wasn't much growth in the actual value. And then if you consider the property taxes I paid, the upkeep I've had on it, the roofs I've had to put on it, and all the other expenses that go into home ownership, you don't go into a home to make money. It's a quality of life thing. It does provide equity. And then if you go and sell it, and you make it, and you have a profit on it, then where are you going to live? You're going to have to plow that money back into it. So it's just a solid quality of life investment, not necessarily a great investment for retirement. Okay, another thing that I've always done, and I advocate, even if it's a 0% interest loan to buy a car, is pay cash for an automobile. I mean, so many people have so much money wrapped up in cars, and that's just to me, it's a bad idea, because a car, the depreciation on a car makes it senseless to pay interest on it. You know what I mean? It just depreciates so fast. So pay for it in cash if you can. If you can't, as I say, when I do the classes in high school, my line was, if you can't afford to pay cash for a car, buy a cheaper one. If you can't afford a cheaper one, buy a cheaper one. If you can't afford a cheaper one, buy a cheaper one. If you can't afford a cheaper one, buy a moped. If you can't afford a moped, then get a bicycle. You can't afford a bicycle, get a pair of shoes. Trust me, the more you walk, the more you'll save. But the truth is that, especially when we're young, we got to have that car. And you're starting out, you probably don't have a whole lot of resources to pay for it, and you're in debt, and then you're going credit cards and all this kind of stuff. They're just financial black holes. So, it should try to pay cash for them. And life insurance. You need life insurance when you have dependents. And my preferred one is term life insurance. Not the whole life and the universal life and all that kind of stuff. Term life insurance, great products. And for the term in which you're going to be supporting kids, you have a wife, you have a house to pay for, and stuff like that, you want to make sure you're insured. Don't go without life insurance. Okay. Then we're talking about how much money does it take to retire on? When do I know I can retire? And I would say that there's lots of fancy formulas out there trying to give you an idea. But my experience is this whole having enough money to retire is really, at best, a great guess. It's about probabilities and statistics. And you can have the best plan in the world and throw it out if something major happens to your health, or you get in a car accident and things go bad and stuff like that. All you can do is give yourself the best possibilities. So I'll give you kind of some guidelines about good strategies to help you to know, how much can I spend, how much do I need? Well, one of them is the old 4% rule. So you do an audit and get a really solid idea of what you need for basic expenses in your life. That's really important. Insurance and food, transportation, housing, and all that kind of stuff. And then put that number down. And then add, how much do we need for our standard of living, the fun stuff we do. Throw that on there. Then you kind of got a rough idea of how much I need. Remember, this is after-tax dollars too. You have to remember that. Okay, and then a pretty good guideline that's worked is called the 4% rule. So if you take your investments and you take 4% from it, and that's enough to cover what you've just done, that's a good idea. Another one is called the rule of 25. And the rule of 25 states that you take, let's say you need $25,000. Remember, $25,000, that sounds like a ridiculously low number, but let's say you get $20,000 from Social Security and then maybe $5,000 from a pension. So that means that actually got like $50,000 coming in. So you're going to only need 25 of it off of your investments to cover the 50 because you got Social Security and pension coming in. So you multiply 25. That means if you have around $625,000 in investments, pretty good idea. You can take $25,000 from it on an annual basis, and you're probably statistically not going to run out of money in your lifetime. But I got some other stuff to throw in here because it's not that easy just to say the 4% rule and so forth, and you're going to see that. One of the things that affects if your money is going to last is your asset allocation. So you basically find that if you invest too conservatively, like you put 100% of your money just in fixed income, then basically statistically between 1926 and 1996, if you just went with 100% bonds, the odds over a 30-year period of running out of money is that it's very, very high probability that your money is going to last. Drawing 4%, you only have a 20% chance your money is going to last. So people who just put their money into really safe stuff because they think they have enough, well, inflation and other things just overcome that with your spending, and you get no growth to overcome the inflation, and you're going to run out of money. You bump that asset allocation model up to about 50-50, gives you about a 95% chance that your money will last 30 years. Pretty darn good. See, it's all about statistics and probability. There's nothing that's 100% because there's just so many things can happen to affect this. Another one that's very interesting is paying attention to when you retire. Because what statistics have shown is people who retire when we have a bad period in investing, meaning, stocks are really doing poorly, bonds are not doing really good, then these 4% models, you can throw them out the window. In this example, if you started with $1 million and you withdrew 5% from it, and you had a 60% stock mix, 40% bonds, and this is between the time period here is a long time, 1971 to 1995, based on that time period, running probabilities. If your average return is 6% with the bad years late, then you probably after 30 years end up with $1.25 million, taking the 5% withdrawal, meaning your returns, the bad ones, were late, not early. But if the bad returns were in the first 5 years, in the beginning, then what you find is your money runs out. So same amount to start with, same withdrawal rate, same return, but the bad years were the first couple of years. That's why in retirement planning, I always cringe when somebody says, oh, you know what? When we retire, we're going to buy ourselves a great big camper. We're going to go see the world. And, $100,000, $200,000 camper. And they're spending all this money up front because they're withdrawing from their investments. And then if you have a bad year on top of it, because bad years, you're spending that money when things are way down. It's just a bad idea. So just a word of caution is when you retire, monitor and be aware that 4% rule and the rule of 25 is based on how much you have. So if you retire that first year and you have $500,000 and all of a sudden it's down to $400,000, instead of $20,000, you got to take 16. You get it? It's based on what you have, not what you had at the beginning of the year. You have to adjust. And one of the things that allows you to adjust once goes back to the chart before, if you don't have debt. So in retirement planning, when people ask me, get the house paid for. Yeah, but my mortgage is only 3%. Yeah, it's 3%. So, that's a great mortgage rate, but you still are paying that money back, and you have that obligation to pay it back. You can't just call the bank and say, well, this is a bad year in the stock market. I hate to have to pay it back. You got the money. Pay it. Going into retirement without debt allows you so much flexibility on how much you have to take from your portfolio. You can delay buying cars. You can delay taking trips. You can delay that stuff. But if you have a bunch of obligations, you got to pay car payments, you got to pay home mortgages, you got a boat loan, you got all that kind of stuff, just get rid of debt as much as possible. Credit card debt, just go into retirement without debt. This really, really helps you to abide and be flexible, because there's some years where that 4% on the start of the year sounded great and you easy, but all of a sudden you have a really bad year. You're going to need to adjust and ratchet down spending. This is another chart that just shows that. The first 5 years, if your chance that your money will last, if your returns are 4 to 5%, there's a 74% chance that'll go for the 30 years. If it goes down to 2 to 3%, it drops down to 64. And if it's negative, then it's only a 43% chance it's going to. So you see, the first couple of years are really, really important. And then costs. Like, if you have, like, say, a $200,000 nest egg in a fund, and it grows at 8%, and you're using the 4% withdrawal rate, and you do that for 30 years. If the fees are 1.5%, then you can only withdraw $9,600. If the fees are 0.2, which is like 1/4%, you can draw $11,300. Drop that down to, now you have expenses of 0.04. That bumps this down up considerably from that. Expenses are part of the 4%. So people can sit there and say, oh, gee, you know, we're only withdrawing and staying under the 4%. Yes, it's not working. But they don't consider their expenses, the expenses that they're paying on their investments. That's another cost of living that you're paying. And most people have no idea how much they're paying in expenses. They have no in their portfolio. You have two guys. They're 65 years old. They retire. And they get a 2% annual return. So this is a very, very low annual return. Just this example. Carl and Adam. They have $750,000 when they retire. Their monthly withdrawal is $3,500 a month. They withdraw from the $750,000. They do this for 20 years. Carl has an annual expense of $1.25, which is, in the mutual fund industry, considering, you know, you're paying your manager and the other expenses, that would be really low. And then you have an index fund, which is 0.04. Well, it's kind of odd to have an index fund for 20 years only return 2%, but this is just showing you an example of consequences. So over that 20 years, Carl has foregone earnings of $23,887 and a total of $85,357 in fees. Adam has earnings of his foregone earnings of $961. In other words, the foregone earnings on the compounding was only $961 versus $23,000. And the total fees he paid were $3,240. That, over 20 years, that is a big difference. It's part of that 4% in expenses that people, it's a phantom fee that people have a hard time calculating when they're using the 4% rule. Got it? You can see the difference. It's quite impressive. Another study that looked at the effect of fees and you're running out of money. So if your fees are low, in other words, you're using the 4% rule, and your fees are really, really low, very small chance you're going to run out of money after 30 years. You bump that up to fees of 1%, then all of a sudden you're back up to like a 35% chance that you're going to run out of money. Drop that up to 1.5%, and you're getting near 40% chance. You have expenses of 1.75, it shoots up to almost a 50% chance you're going to run out of money, even if you're abiding by the 4% rule. So expenses are a big part of making sure you don't run out of money in retirement. It's just crucial to pay attention to what you're spending, especially when you're retired, on your investments. Okay. So, as I said, I kind of got this out of order, but because we were talking about taxes earlier, but this is how important it is to pay attention to taxes and the effect that it's going to have on your long-term growth. So, if you take $5,000 and you invest it annually for basically a period of 45 years, and you have an 8% annual return, if you can invest that in a tax shelter, say like an IRA, whether it be a Roth or a traditional, it'll grow to over $2 million. But if you pay 28% taxes on it, between state and federal, it'll only grow to $750,000. That's $1.25 million difference. Really, really a big deal. That's how much taxes affects returns. And that's why using your tax shelters. So when I meet a young person and their objective is to do kind of what I did, because I'll meet somebody that's 30 and they're very ambitious and they said, yeah, I want to be able to get to financially a place where in my 50s I can stop working. I always tell them that, yeah, it's great to use your tax shelters, max out your IRAs, max out your company retirement plan. But they do that because they're super savers, super workers, and then they have extra money to invest. I really think if your objective is to stop working before the age of 59 and a half, where you can access the money out of these without penalties and taxes, then something like that intermediate tax-exempt bond fund is a really good choice to pile money in. Or use the total stock market index fund and the federally tax-exempt bond fund, which I use, to accumulate money tax efficiently outside of the IRAs. And it's really a good idea to strategize ahead of time. So I advocate young people to, especially when they're first starting out, to open Roth IRAs. Roth IRAs are my preferred choice, especially when you're younger. And my preferred strategy, because what they do is they give you so much options when you do retire, because then you can adjust how much you have in taxable returns on any given year. For instance, my brother, he was accumulating money for retirement, and I said, even though he was in a higher tax bracket, I said, it's probably a really good idea to put money in a Roth IRAs when he first started, and he did. Eventually, he began earning enough where he couldn't invest in Roth IRAs, and then I advocated he put money in these tax-exempt bond funds and to use the tax-managed funds, because if you have all your money tied up into a shelter like a traditional IRA, when you retire, and you take money out of traditional IRAs, they're fully taxed as income. But if you have money in like that tax-exempt tax-managed fund I talked about, or the intermediate tax-exempt bond fund, or even the total stock market index fund, if you sell that, that's a long-term capital gain, and it won't affect your tax bracket, your income level. So in other words, let's say you have $100,000 of taxable income, and then you sell a taxable investment of $25,000. That's a long-term capital gain. That won't be added, and now you have $125,000 of income. Your tax bracket is based on the $100,000 you have. This is different. Got it? So long-term capital gains don't necessarily jump you into higher tax brackets. You need to strategize ahead of time to give yourself options when you retire to be able to adjust how much you have in taxable income. And that's what I did, and it's really helped me in those years leading up to when I finally had to start taking money from IRAs and stuff like that. I had investments that were not in tax shelters, but they were tax efficient, which allowed me to manage my tax brackets smartly. Just for people who are super savers and stuff like that, really good idea. Now, I said I get asked all the time, people who are retired, and they ask me, well, I have $300,000 from my company retirement plan. What do you think about taking that and converting it to a Roth IRA? Because you can take money from a traditional IRA and convert it to a Roth IRA. That's really great. What's really bad is that year, that $300,000 you converted puts you into the tax bracket of the $300,000 of income. That's really bad. So I don't know what it is, but it's probably between state and federal, it could be close to 30%. So how are you going to make that up? You know what I mean? So my guidelines for people about, first of all, Roth IRAs is when they first came out with Roth IRAs, I thought, my God, these things, this is so good. It's a no-brainer. Now, why would anybody put money in a traditional IRA? So I figured there's got to be a catch. There's got to be something the traditional IRA offers that the Roth, necessarily, isn't necessarily always the best choice. And so I just created a hypothetical example, and I calculated it out. So let's say you have two people, and they have $5,000 of income to invest on any given year. And the first one puts it in a Roth IRA. Well, right away, they're going to have to pay taxes. So let's assume the taxes take $1,350 between state and federal. Okay? So they don't have $5,000 to invest. They have $3,650 to invest. Do you follow that? Because a Roth IRA is after-tax income. If you go to the traditional IRA or the traditional company retirement plan, you can put $5,000 in, and it's not taxed. It's tax deferred. So anyway, let's say we go for 35 years. This one will grow to $60,000. This one will grow to $80,000 because you're starting with more money here. Ultimately, they retire, and they want to get the money. With the Roth IRA, you can take the full $60,000 out. With the traditional IRA, you take $60,000 after taxes if you're in that tax bracket. So anyway, who's ever on Zoom, thank you for shutting that off. That was very challenging. That's like talking about investments in a bathroom. Anyway. So kind of the rule of the thumb is put money into a Roth IRA if when you take it out, you're going to be in a higher tax bracket. Put money in traditional is if when you take it out, you'll be in a lower tax bracket than once you put it in. So what's happened with me is I didn't have Roths available. But when they became available, I could have converted, and I thought about this. And I thought, there is absolutely no way, after 20 years of using traditional IRAs, that I would convert with the amount, because of the tax hit I would have gotten on an annual basis would have been incredible. And how do I make that up? So I have found that when I was working I'm in a much higher tax bracket than I when I quit working. Part of it is because I did planning ahead of time. I had investments that were either long-term capital gains or they're federally tax-exempt interest in income. And furthermore, kind of when you retire, you can also find that usually the kids are grown up, the mortgage is paid for. You don't necessarily need the income that you had to maintain your standard of living when you had kids at home and you're paying the mortgage and car, stuff like that. So I found that my tax bracket dropped when I actually quit working. So for me, the traditional IRA has worked out awesome. Now, the downside of the traditional IRA, of course, is every penny you take out is taxed as income. The other thing is you have the minimum required distribution. And I've had people to come to me, and I'm not one. First of all, I have no ability of playing a violin. So when somebody gives me the sad story about, oh my God, I have my RMD, I've got to take this money out of this RMD, and they're whining to me about it, and I'm saying, all I can think in my head is, you just had like 50 years of compounded tax-deferred growth on this investment. What more do you want? The fact is, and it's going to continue to be tax-deferred, you're not going to take it all out with this RMD. The RMD is ridiculously a small amount. I think it starts out at 3.8%, meaning you're leaving 96% of it in there to grow another year tax-deferred. And the next year it's like close to maybe 4%. You're still leaving 96% in there. For heaven's sakes, I think by the time you get to be like 90, it's only up to 10%. So you're getting like a tremendous amount of tax-deferred growth and compounding on this. So don't whine about this. This is the traditional is a great product, a great shelter too. So I don't like converting simply because you're probably going to get hit a monster amount on taxes, and you don't have a lot of years to make it up because you're retired already, and your clock is ticking. You don't have 50 years to make up for the 30% you paid in taxes. And it's probably a sizable amount versus if you do it when you're younger. I've had people in this class that have very low incomes. And so they strategize and they figure out how much can I take each year from my traditional IRA to move it to the Roth and still not get taxed or move me into a tax bracket because of the standard deduction and stuff like that. That's a viable option. If you're converting and you're keeping it in the 12% tax bracket and you're doing a small amount every year, then I suppose it's a viable option. But usually when I ask people why they do that, they tell me, well, I want to pass on the Roth IRA to my kids. And of course that sounds really great. And then I ask them, well, how are your kids doing? Oh, my son's a doctor. My daughter is a lawyer. The other one's a professor at Stanford University. I'm going like, what do they need your Roth IRA money for? You know what I mean? So once again, this idea that passing money on, it just, use it while you're alive. If there's something left over, you can pass it on. They can inherit IRAs and stuff like that. So I love Roth IRAs. When you're younger, you're in a lower tax bracket, but as you progress up the scale, I love the traditional ones for the tax benefits of it. And then ultimately, I don't like converting because of the tax consequences of it. So just doing it so that your kids don't have to pay the taxes, once again, they can pay the taxes after you're dead. It's a gift. Okay. Here's a tax managed balance fund because somebody asked me about performance on it. I didn't even know I stuck this in here. Once again, a senior moment. Okay, so the tax managed balance fund has an expense ratio of 0.09. Vanguard on a 0 to 5 risk scale puts it at 3. And so this fund was formed in 2009, or 94, or 1994, and up until 2009 when I made this chart, it had an average return of 7.41. Look at that. I figured that out just by using mean returns. See, it's performing to the means of the indexes, which is my goal in investing. You know what I mean? And as I said, they have one, the capital appreciation one, which vests 100% in the stock market. That's rated 4. That had an average return of 9.6. And, of course, the small capitalization, which is the riskiest one, averaged almost 11%. But that's the options in the tax-managed space. Social Security. People ask me, when should I take Social Security? Once again, I can only say what I've done. So based on if you're born between 1943 and 1954, age 62 you start it, you get 75%. Age 65, it's 93.3%. Maximum is at 66. If you wait till 70, then it bumps up to 132 of your thing. So the older you get, the more you delay, the better the benefit. And so in my case, what I've done is my wife and I both had pretty close to the same incomes. And so I told Marie, well, just take it at 62. And she did. And I waited till 70, and then I started taking it. And, of course, now she's mad as a wet hen because, like, whoa, look at how much you get versus me. Why didn't I wait? But she was happy to get the checks. But anyway, basically, usually the advice I've read is if you're married, the one with the lower income, it's probably a good idea to take it at 62 and then the other one wait till 70. In my case, I waited till 70. And there's a benefit to it, obviously, in the higher return. But if I die before Marie, then she will get my benefit. That's, I just did it because for her. I don't, anyway, but I still want to get into that any further. But anyway, it's really worked out fine for me. I have a pretty good chart here kind of showing about taking it the break-even point. You can see it kind of intersects in, if you started at 62, I really, by taking it at 70, I only start gaining on this whole proposition at somewhere around 79. So my advice is look in the mirror when you're 62. If you look like warmed over death, take it at 62. But if you have a history of living longer and you have the ability, see, Social Security is a wonderful supplement to help you to retire earlier and stay within not taking more than 4% from your portfolio. So if you get to be 62 and you realize that the nest egg that you've accumulated, you're going to have to take more than 4% or even 5% from your portfolio to meet your needs, then you really need to take the Social Security to make sure that you're not taking money from your investments more than you need to. You can have all the wish to wait till 70, but financially it's probably smarter to not burn your portfolio up and take the Social Security to assist you to keeping yourself under that cap. Because as I said, there's nothing worse than being 85 years old and finding out you're running out of money and you're still in pretty good health. You know what I mean? You got to be smart about that. And being smart about Social Security is a good idea. So I kind of like wrap this up with, I call them Kemp's Golden Rules of Finance. So number one, place saving as a priority over non-essential spending. Always done that. Remember, money is a tool when investing, not just a commodity. So many people don't think of money as a tool. It's a tool, and you can build your financial health by using the tools, using money wisely. Okay? Understand money is never free. So all these, you're constantly barraged by gimmicks telling you it's free. It's free. I mean, for heaven's sakes, politicians get elected telling you that all these benefits you're going to get, they're all free, you know. I mean, there's nothing free in the world when it comes to money. There's something behind it. Educate yourself on investing. As I said, really good book. Read Common Sense on Mutual Funds by John Bogle. A fantastic book. It's a cornerstone, probably the first major book I ever read about investing that just hit it out of the park. The second one that hit it out of the park was Winning the Loser's Game by Charles Ellis. Just absolutely brilliant, fantastic book. You get more, if that's not enough for you, and you really want to get into War and Peace of investing, A Random Walk Down Wall Street by, I forgot who his name is, but anyway, that's a classic too. But these are really, really very good books that don't go over your head, but they do a great job of talking about the fundamentals of investing. Minimizing your expenses in investing. I hope you heard that. Make your portfolio tax efficient. Pay close attention to interest rates and inflation. And it has to do with what your expectations for bonds and your expectations for stocks. Don't overexpose yourself to risky investments. Every time in my life, I thought, especially when I was younger, when I didn't use the total stock market index fund and had a different, every time I thought this is the next great idea, every risky investment, they usually blew up. Keep emotions like greed and fear from influencing your investment decisions. These two emotions will devastate you in your choice making with investments. Eliminate those as much as possible. And finally, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, enjoy your money when you're alive. And it doesn't mean going out and buying non-essential stuff. You really enjoy your money when you spend it on something you really enjoy. If you buy a boat and you go out once a month or once a summer, you might have really enjoyed it once. Is it really worth it? Now, but spending your money on things you really enjoy, like a new driver for golf, great investment. Marie says another. In fact, the FedEx guy goes like, he knows me personally. So Marie goes another, but it's worth it because it hits it 10 yards farther. So I enjoy what I spend money on because it's things that I use. I don't have to have a storage shed in my life to accumulate all the junk that I bought because I don't use it. The stuff I have, I use, and I buy good stuff. And then charity and sharing money. I don't like calling it charity, but just helping others when you have the ability to help others. And if you can do it on a personal basis, it's even that much better. That makes all that hard work and sacrifice so much worth it. And like I say, I only am sharing what I've learned in my life. Doesn't mean you have to do it, but it's worked for me, and that's why I do the class. So, any questions? Ooh, good. Yes. Okay, her question revolves around the RMD. So, as I said, I advocate simplifying your investments, because there are people who will come to me and ask me for help, and I always will cringe when they walk with a briefcase that they're literally tilting, because they'll have investments all over the place. You understand, your RMD is based on the totality of money that you have in these tax shelters, be it 401ks, 457s, IRAs. And they'll have 5 IRAs. Like you have a CD over here and a CD over at this bank, and they're all in IRAs. Okay, so the RMD is based on the totality that you have in these tax shelters. And Bank X doesn't communicate with Bank Y. Bank Y doesn't communicate with Bank Z. Brokerage account over here doesn't communicate with the banks. In other words, they only know about what you have there, and they might notify that you need to take an RMD. And so it can get very, very, very confusing with this RMD if you have your stuff sprawled out all over the place. So, like I say, I have it condensed down into an IRA, and I have it at Vanguard. So when I call Vanguard and say I want to take my RMD, Vanguard takes care of all the notifications of, see, an IRA is in what's called a custodial account. So anybody who handles your IRA is the custodian of it. And so on an annual basis, the IRS, they communicate everything about what you've done, any activity you've done in your IRA. So, yeah, I mean, you don't have to do anything. So basically, that's all taken care of. But you must take the RMD because you don't want to not take it. Because if you don't take it, the next year, the tax on what you didn't take is 50%. Extremely punitive. So taking the RMD is really important. And when you simplify it and get it in one place, it's so much easier to do the calculation and make sure you've done it right. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yes. 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 So when you contact who's handling your IRA, you must stipulate, I'm taking, well, yeah, because you can take money from IRAs, and if you don't tell them it's an RMD, then, you know, you have to stipulate this is my RMD. But I'm only saying that because I think that it might be that will just taking it out randomly I think it's just you have to take a certain amount out and you know, pay the taxes on it. I don't know if you necessarily have to tell them RMD, but I think that's the normal procedure. But the more I think about it, as long as you're taking it out, I think it would qualify as part of your RMD. But I would definitely check with whoever's your custodian, you know, the company. But it seems to me that would be the smarter thing to do, is tell them, this is my RMD, because they will tell you, well, they'll probably tell you then, well, that's not enough, you need to take this much to get to the RMD. You see what I'm saying? Yep. Someone else had a question. Yes.
So for work, they originally offered the pre-tax for 401, and then now they offer the Roth for 401.
Yep.
But I also do the Roth IRA separately.
Yep.
So I've always had my 401 pre-K.
Yep.
Is it worth going to a Roth 401? Or is
You have that choice.
yes, which is, I believe, new. I just haven't looked at
How old are you?
29.
Oh, I would go the Roth, but eventually a man of your intellect and skill I mean, the sky's the limit. So now you're probably going to be a much lower tax bracket than what you're going to be when you're 40 or 50. You see what I'm saying? Because hopefully your income is going to keep going up. So take advantage of these years to stock money into that in the Roth plans, because it'll give you so much more flexibility when you ultimately retire. I mean, I did such a good job at this that there were multiple years where I had no federal income taxes because I withdrew money to live on from money that was tax exempt, money and stuff like that. So that kind of helped a lot of years where, didn't have to pay taxes. But eventually when I had to start taking from the one thing is about the government, you live long enough, they eventually do get you. And I'm not complaining about it because I'm just blessed that I was able to have money in tax shelters to grow. And I have no problems with paying the taxes on all that accumulation and stuff like that. I just, you know what I mean? Yes.
You talked about a custodial account.
That's
And different than a self-managed.
okay. So there's lots of different terms that people use. Oftentimes, it's if you have money that's not in, they're called qualified accounts. Custodial is just a term for the financial institution that handles your IRA or your investments that are in tax shelters. And the custodial part is it's their responsibility to make sure you're abiding by the rules, like not putting too much in there that you're not qualified to put in, and stuff like that, and that you're paying your RMDs and all that kind of stuff. And so oftentimes it's like non-qualified versus qualified. There's different terms that companies use, a personal account, stuff like that.
And are these self-managed or whatever?
Yeah. Yep.
I wondered if that's similar or if this is a term that you use.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't heard of that.
One of the interesting things is I see these ads on TV all the time because the Secure Act 2, which is the follow-up to Secure Act 1, where they raised the RMD age to 70. And I think now, under Secure Act 2, it's to 75. But the people who are already paying, even though they're not 75, they still have, Anyway, they changed a lot of different stuff in there. It bounces around and stuff. So you have to kind of keep up with what they're doing on all these things. Now, I had a lady, a teacher that I used to read to the kids in her class, and I happened to be walking the dogs, and she lives by the trail, so I stopped by her house, and she was telling me that she had put a bunch of money into 529s for her kids and stuff like that. But then she said that they changed the law now that you can convert money from them into IRAs or something like that if the kids don't use it. It used to be that, because I had people that piled a whole bunch of money away into these 529s, and then their kids didn't use the money. So then you take that money out, it's taxed as income. It's interesting. I can't keep up with all the different changes and all that kind of stuff, so it's always good to, before you do something, when it talks to any of these qualified or tax shelters, to make sure that whoever's the custodian of them, that you make sure you're doing all the rules and things right, because they're changing them all the time.
Well, I know that they every year they send what the RMD will be to them.
Yes, I mean, like a place I know at Vanguard, because that's who I'm familiar with. You can actually tell them on this specific date, on any given year, take my RMD automatically, and they'll do that for you. That's what my mom and dad used to do. So they didn't have to think about it. It was automatically done, out of the way, taken. Yes?
With the Roth and the IRAs, when you start pulling money out of your accounts, which would you pull?
You mean the money that's in the Roth IRA, the investments inside the Roth IRA? So that's a great question. So basically it has to do with your total asset allocation. So if you look at your Roth, if I was setting up everything, if I had a company retirement plan, I had a traditional IRA, I had a Roth IRA, I basically across the board would be 50-50. So that when I get to that question of what I take out, it will be the asset that's higher on my asset allocation. You see what I'm saying? Now there's people that tell me, well, why wouldn't you just put stock market assets in Roth IRAs because you get the most growth in there? But the truth is that, especially when you quit working and stuff like that, by having a balanced portfolio, when you're taking from it, wouldn't you want to have assets that have less volatility? You had years and years of growth when you were younger and stuff like that. By adjusting it to balanced out, you're taking taxable bond investments and turning them into tax-free bond investments by putting them in Roth IRAs. So I have no problem with putting bonds and stocks in Roth IRAs, and so then taking it from the asset. That's a great question because that's what my brother did. My brother, well, he isn't old enough, he doesn't have to take RMDs, but he retired in March, and now he needed to take money for living this year, that to make it through the end of the year, and he has a Roth IRA. He asked me that same question, and my answer to him was, the stock market is near all-time highs right now. Take it from stocks inside your Roth IRA. So the Roth IRA doesn't have to be just stocks or bonds. It could be whatever. I like to balance everything out, all your different things.
And then my other question was, when you're at the age of having to pick medical care, do you have a preference between the supplemental plan and the advantage plan?
Wow, I mean, I have no expertise at all in that. All I can tell you is what I did. So, I mean, there was an insurance person that they always sit down and give you all these different options. And so I think I have United Healthcare at one of those. But basically with mine is all Marie Cares is that Silver Sneakers is included. But no, I mean, we have, even though we're blessed that neither one of us are on medications and all that kind of stuff, I made sure that I had that supplement on there. It's just kind of the basic plan to cover, but it's not the fancy one that has dental and all that extra stuff in there. It's just kind of a basic one. And I was actually really shocked because the premiums for years were, since we turned 65, there was always it was like $125, and I think it went up maybe to $140 for me, and then $140, and they would take it out of my bank account and every month. All of a sudden, January came around, and the first statement I got from my bank, it was $73 for me and $73 for my wife. And I'm like, what the hell? Somebody screwed up there. So I had to call. I'm saying, like, you guys aren't charging me enough. The lady she couldn't believe I asked that. I said, but normally it was like, and they said, well, they did a evaluation of the plans and stuff like that and realized that they could cut the expenses down. And because anybody believe it? Insurance costs went down and was cut in half this year. Now next year it'll probably be $200 a month for each of us. But anyway, that's about what it costs. But it's not. It's called the Platinum Plan or whatever or something like that. And I love it because Marie had a knee replacement and very few expenses out of pocket. I had a hernia and I had that operated on, and I had very few extra expenses. We haven't had a lot of medical things, but vaccinations, I mean, it's obviously there's probably more comprehensive ones, but This is pretty good, and it's the most popular one that they have. So, yeah, you have to see and weigh it, the expenses and stuff like that. But yeah, it's kind of mind-numbing. It's supposed to be simple, but boy, you should just don't go with just Medicare. You need that extra stuff. You know what I mean? But how much extra stuff? It's kind of like buying a car. You know what I mean? Do you need the car loaded with, does it have to be James Bond's car or one that functions for you, So that's the decision kind of I think you have to make. Yes?
So, you had mentioned that your wife had taken Social Security earlier.
Yes.
You later.
Yeah.
I assume you guys weren't working, is that right?
Pardon?
Were you working full-time, or?
No,
You were retired, but she's still working?
no,
Okay.
no.
So if you were working in that same scenario, so one spouse takes retirement at, say, at 62, the other one's late, is still working, and you had extra income because you paid off everything, you can dump as much money in your 401k because it's the catch-up period and stuff like that. Is there any reason not to just dump it in, say, stock market index and a bond fund, and then not worry about the 403 or off?
You mean taking the Social Security money?
No, taking your well, if your spouse is working,
Yeah,
taking Social Security.
right. I mean,
Taking all her extra money and just dumping it into that catch-up plan.
it depends who you're married to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's not a bad idea. If one of the spouse, like if one of them is working and can pay all the bills from that, and then one of them takes that 62, uses that as a source for extra investments, probably a really good idea. You might have a better return than waiting till you're 70 with that money by investing it.
But the tax efficiency or things like that of using it.
Well, I mean, like I say, Social Security is not fully taxed yet. I mean,
But it's not earned income either.
I'm not a tax expert on that. I don't know if it affects your earned income tax bracket. I think it might. I don't know.
It affects your earned income tax bracket, but I don't think you can dump it from your Social Security account, dump it from your
Eh,
investment.
I'm not a tax expert on all that stuff, so that's why I rely on my AARP tax calculator to make sure on that. But that's an interesting idea about taking Social Security early, one of the spouses, so that you can invest more money into like a Roth IRA or whatever. That's an interesting thought. Provided that you don't have to touch your investments, because with the one spouse that's still working is making enough to cover everything. As long as your wife goes along with it.
Just have to convince your wife you can live on that long.
My wife likes to shop, so I would never. That topic would have never come up in our house. Any other questions? Yes.
Tax advisor, does Vanguard have tax advisors that can help with setting up tax advantage investments?
I don't think so. I don't know. You'd have to ask them. They might. It seems like Vanguard has broadened out the services that they have tremendously. You could ask them. I don't know. I know that you can set up an account and then you get an advisor. And it's like 30-some basis points. And then I don't know if tax counseling is on that, but I don't know. Yes.
So, I've made a will, you have a couple more years. Do you keep any of the other wills? And is there a reason to keep those copies?
So you have wills of the past,
Yeah.
and you've updated now with a new will.
Correct. Did we
Well, the new will should supersede everything else, right? By the way, I didn't cover that. I usually included another lesson. I had an attorney come in and do estate planning. That's part of finances. So basically, I'll share with you what I learned. John Birmingham came in for years, and some of the highlights that I've learned from him, which I instilled for me, I will share with you about estate planning. Because I think a lot of people spend a lot of money on estate planning and not necessarily don't really have to. It depends on what you want with your estate plan. But once again, I like a simple estate plan. So I really strongly believe, get an attorney, draw up a will. I mean, a will is a document you really have, should have. But it really, like for Marie and I would say the will is only going to cover like a minor amount of our assets, because most of our assets have beneficiaries on it. Probably, to me, the most powerful tool an individual has in estate planning is a beneficiary, which costs you nothing to do, and you don't need an attorney. So your IRAs automatically have beneficiaries on them, but you can actually put a beneficiary on your house, which is another major asset people have. So it's called a deed on death. So an attorney goes down to the Register of Deeds, and let's say you have 2 children. You can put a beneficiary on your house. So when the last surviving spouse passes away, the house goes to the children without probate. All they have to go down is register of deeds, show the death certificate, and then the house is automatically changed, the ownership, to the 2 children. And if you put down 50-50 on it, whatever, that it's done. It's beneficiary. So basically, if your assets are less than a certain amount, your whole estate is not even probated. So we kind of like made sure that we had a will for the junk that we have that we want to go to nieces and nephews and stuff like that. And then we have beneficiaries. And then also, very important, powers of attorneys for health care is really, really important, that you have powers of attorneys for health care, so that someone can make a medical decision for you in the event you need to have it. Doesn't matter what age you are, get a power of attorneys for health care. Really good idea. And you can have power of attorneys for finance too. That can get a little trickier. Just make sure you don't have somebody like Bernie Madoff handling your finances, nobody in prison, something like that. It's not a good idea. But basic things like that. But I learned a lot from John Birmingham about the power of putting beneficiaries on things to make estate planning extremely easy. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Yeah. But John used to have such good stories when he told his lessons on estate planning about, the seamlessly assets in the millions of dollars would go here, there, and everything. But boy, Grandma staged teacup. The house, my God, or else his favorite one was a story about the grand piano. Because Grandma promised, Jennifer, when she came to say, Jennifer, you're going to have this piano when I die. So then Anne would come. Anne, when I die, you're going to have this grand piano. And the other, Mary, when you come. So then all of a sudden she dies, and everybody's like, oh, it's mine. Grandma promised me. And there's big fights and stuff like that. So that's for a will, if you have anything emotional stuff, especially jewelry and stuff like that. Wills are really wonderful for that. But, it doesn't. You don't have to necessarily set up really complex things. Estate planning can be relatively simple, and I thank God, because I was the what do you call the person that takes care of when your parents die? Executor of my dad's estate. My dad lived longer than my mom. And because they had beneficiaries and stuff like that, it was extremely easy to do without a lot of complexities. So, yes.
So you had mentioned AARP as a tax calculator.
Yeah.
Are there other sources for a retirement calculator, specifically like if you take Social Security and they say it's 30, 34 or something like that, it's supposed to go down to 80%, I guess. Are there calculators you could, say the 4% rule or the?
I'm sure there's lots of them out there. I mean, I have a lot of charts here showing that, but my advice, having being a professionally retired person, in that you can take a lot of that stuff and just, it's not black and white. Ultimately, my advice is get rid of debt, which really allows you own the things that you have in your life. It allows you that adaptability to reduce expenses when you're challenged financially with something. And there's so many different windfalls, and you know, it's just like there's no 100%. It's all about statistics and probabilities. So if somebody says, you know, this is a foolproof thing right here. You know, only a fool believes a foolproof plan, as far as I'm concerned.
But when you do your January rebalancing,
Yep.
you don't use another calculator to see what it's going to be for
Nope. All I do is,
the year, I guess?
all I have to do is I look at my December statement, and I got a pretty good idea of what my asset allocation mix is. And Vanguard does a fantastic job. It's like they got a pie chart, and it says fixed income, equities, percentage-wise, right there. It's just a no-brainer.
Right, but I mean for the next fiscal year. So if like in January 2024, you did for 2024,
Right.
you look at 2025 or 2026.
Not until it comes around.
Okay.
All right. Jane needs to go home today. She's been in a long enough day, and thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. It's been a wonderful. I mean, it's just like being able to do this every year. It's just like recreation for me. I love it, and it's so much fun. And I hope it helps all of you as much as I wish. So thank you for coming, and that's it.